The book is called Swap. The subtitle, A Secret History of the New Cold War. The authors, multiple Pulitzer Prize finalists, Hinshaw, Joe Parkinson. Joe, it's great to have you here. I love to ask reporters who've written books this question. What's your favorite nugget of reporting in the book? There's many to choose from. I will let the audience know that.
Where to start? I think if you're a fan of real-life spy thrillers, which I always have been, and growing up I've always read John le Carré, Ian Fleming, and the authors that follow them, finding out the thing that's the most important to Vladimir Putin, the kind of asset, the kind of spy that's the most important to him, which is the illegals, the deep, deep cover spies who spend so many years building their cover that in some cases their own children don't know their identity.
Here in America.
Here in America, we all saw the Americans.
Yes.
This is the real-life Americans for sure, but all over Europe as well. Putin has expanded this program, and we were able to, through reporting in Argentina, Mexico, Greece, Austria, track how these individuals spent decades building completely different lives to ultimately blend into the middle of Europe in a free access zone, Schengen, to be mobilized in preparation for the war in Ukraine. And of course, this couple who are on the cover of this book here, these two Russian spies who claim to be Argentines and their children, were just four of the individuals of the 26 who were swapped last year in that epic East-West prisoner swap. Drew,
your favorite nugget?
What surprised me about writing this book is you think that foreign policy is driven by, people sitting in State Department cubicles or the White House or the Situation Room. But this is the story of ordinary Americans who've been thrown into Russian jails and left to rot. And what is surprising about this world is the role that their mothers, their sisters play to liberate them, to push their government, to go up to bat against the Russian government. We're talking about ordinary Americans. One of the main characters in our book is a portrait painter in Massachusetts whose brother, Paul Whelan, was thrown into jail, and her name's Elizabeth. And she had to do, for nearly 6 years, constant battle against her own government and the Russian government to get her brother home. And that is thankless work, but it resulted in what is, I think, the subject of our book, which is this massive prisoner swap you saw last year.
I want to tell my audience something. I try to read all the books, but I don't get to all the books. So when I can't get to the entire book, I go through a process, which is I will open it up to a random page and see if the page works. I did that 14 times in the hour and a half I had to prepare for this interview. 14 different pages, randomly selected, just to see if there's something on the page that grabs me. All 14 pages worked. Everything works in this. This reads like a thriller. This reads like a novel, but it is journalistic, reportorial throughout. Anne Applebaum, who's a well-known and well-traveled journalist, writes in a blurb on the front page, "This is essential reading for an era when authoritarians barter in human lives." Is that the essence of this tale?
That's right. This is ancient. The pattern of grabbing someone and holding them to ransom is something that's happened since antiquity. And 20 years ago, this is something terrorist groups do. It's now something that governments do. China has done it. Russia has done it. North Korea has done it. We call it hostage diplomacy, and it's becoming a global challenge for the U.S.
And for Russia, it almost seems like state policy under Putin.
I would say so. I think Putin has definitely been the pioneer and the principal practitioner of hostage diplomacy. And you can see the expansion of it all the way up to more and more high-profile targets. We all remember Brittney Griner, the WNBA star, Evan Gershkovich, our friend and colleague who was taken. Putin has ratcheted up this policy, but what a lot of people don't realize, and we reveal in the book, is that he actually started this 2 weeks into his presidency. An American named Edmund Pope, whose case is nowhere near as well known, was arrested clearly on spurious charges by the FSB. And people may forget that Putin was not only a KGB officer, but he was chairman of the FSB before he became president. Edmund Pope ultimately ended up being freed because Bill Clinton had to call Vladimir Putin. At that time, the US had more leverage and there was less of an antagonistic relationship between the countries. But that was really a very early harbinger of what was to come. And Putin, as we know, maybe there's no such thing as an ex-KGB officer, but the power of the security forces in Russia now, they're the nobility, they run the country, and they're very much behind this program of taking and seizing Americans that they believe that they can trade for political leverage.
And Brittney Griner fit into that category distinctly. And going back to Elizabeth Whelan, the book goes into great detail about how there is a comparative difference when someone of fame is taken by the Russians and someone of comparative less fame, and how much more difficult it is for the families of those who are less well known to keep their family member's name in the conversation at the highest levels of the U.S. government.
That's right. You know, something that happened in...
Brittney Griner had advocates like this.
Exactly. Straight away.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course she
Right.
does.
But then you had kind of ordinary Marines, veterans, who the Russians thought would resonate in America, but didn't. You know, there was Trevor Reed, a Marine who was arrested on a kind of bogus charge of assaulting a police officer. There was Paul Whelan. There's a Marine there right now, Robert Gilman, who's still in Russia. Those cases haven't resonated in the way that Brittney Griner's case, for example, and we're all very glad she's home, resonated. And one of the reasons we wanted to write this book was to kind of show people that, look, this is something that's happening. It's happening to Americans like you and me. There was Mark Fogel, a teacher. This is a much deeper problem than most Americans realize.
I think certainly in Evan, and Evan fitted into that higher profile category because he was the first journalist to be arrested on those kind of charges since the Cold War. But one of the things I think that the book reveals, and what's so worrying, is that this practice is very effective because it reveals the asymmetries in our system.
Talk about that.
Putin, doesn't really have to worry if a Russian spy is put into jail in America or in the UK because he knows that person will wait it out. It's part of their mission. And there's no public pressure on him in order to do a deal. With us, it's a free society. People can campaign, people can lobby, people can advocate, and it puts pressure on the government. Plus, the whole essence of the West is that we put the value on human life. But what is the cost of trading that life? By trading, do you encourage more of the practice? And by trading, is there a moral hazard where Putin or other autocrats who are, responsible for this practice are making you constantly push through different moral thresholds? You trade an arms dealer for a basketball player, you trade a killer, ultimately, in a trade of 26. And it's very effective and it's very precise, and I think the targets are very carefully chosen and calculated.
How did what you just talked about, Joe, filter through the presidencies of Donald Trump and Joe Biden?
Well, it's interesting how it's actually one of the very rare kind of aspects of bipartisan consensus that the American governments both want to bring as many Americans home, I think, as possible, but they obviously have very different tactics. Trump has a very personalized approach, I think we can say, without too much controversy, to these kind of deals. He's very interested in these kind of deals. And when Mark Fogel came home in this second Trump presidency, we know there was a conversation between the two where Trump was very moved by what he heard about what Mark Fogel had been through and made a commitment to try and bring more Americans home. The Biden administration felt, justifiably perhaps, that the Trump tactics were too personalized, and what they wanted to do was to create structure and institutions around it so that you could actually calculate what was a good trade. The trouble is, this is not really something that you can create a matrix for. It's so human, and Putin is such a experienced and cunning operator that I think this idea of trying to create consistency and value was always going to be really difficult.
And Drew, it strikes me that every administration deals with one of many threshold questions, but one of them is, how much does that administration choose to emphasize its desire by name-checking those who are being unlawfully detained?
Right.
Some administrations are like, no, downplay it, don't say it. Exactly. That only creates a higher price that we're ultimately going to have to pay. Do all of that pressurizing secretly, quietly, while others are like, no, let's talk about it.
The families we wrote about...
And that puts the families in a very stressful place.
That's right. And the families we wrote about all got the same advice when their brother, son, loved one vanished into a Russian prison. Be quiet. Let's not rock the boat. The State Department's working on it, etc. But over time, I think what people came to realize is it's the opposite. You're never going to bring your person home unless you make noise, unless you bang the drum, unless you're out there talking, this is what he's going through, this is what the prison's like, this is why he's not guilty of the crime he's been charged and sentenced for. And by the end, you do have this, this is the fame of the person who's taken has such an impact on how they're received in America. And That's a very strange place to be as someone who's, we wrote about, Mark Fogel, this history teacher. His mother was in her 90s when her son was arrested. What a strange thing when you're in your 90s to have to be rallying up a global cause to free your son. It's not second nature for a lot of people.
And Joe, you mentioned the TV show. I was a big fan of it, The Americans. What is interesting is that they were, in the TV show, undercover, undisclosed, but active, doing ops every week, which of course is ridiculous. But that they were doing ops at all differentiates them from the way the illegals mostly operate, which is they don't do ops. They just exist, ready to be sprung into action, but typically are not operative.
That's correct, and I think the
of course, that TV show wouldn't have worked.
It would, you need every episode to have a little bit of dynamism. Whereas, because what we were told by some, people who track this, who work in European intelligence agencies and inside the American system, is this can be the most boring and lonely job in the world, because you leave your homeland, you leave your family, in some cases for decades. You build a new life, which is entirely artificial. It's entirely a kind of, building block of lies, and you're waiting to be what they would call awoken, programmed for your mission. The different Russian agencies that plant illegals have slightly different approaches. So the family we were talking about were the sort of blue ribbon illegals from the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, which is the kind of continuation of the Americans. Decades in the making. The GRU, which is the Russian military intelligence division, they tended to send people out much quicker and were more comfortable with them taking big risks. And those guys were actually a gift to the Americans and the CIA agents who were trying to track them, because they were easier to find, they made more mistakes. They had a little lilt in their accent or what have you, or little tics or giveaways. Right. And what that enabled the Americans plus their partners in Europe to do is, once you find one, you don't arrest them, you wait, because you want to try and find the network.
Right, you want to see who they connect to.
Absolutely.
And how.
Absolutely, and there was a very effective operation that took some years.
Drew, another fact of this is an American in a Russian penitentiary is treated demonstrably worse and has their health and longevity imperiled much more rapidly than a Russian in a European or American penitentiary.
That's right.
This pressurizes the family and the government, whoever's running it.
Right, you're a ticking time bomb. When you're one of these prisoners who's been thrown into a jail and used as a bargaining chip, you're a ticking time bomb. You are, look, this guy's health is really bad. We wrote about Vladimir Kara-Murza. He'd been poisoned twice. He's a journalist for the Washington Post, a Russian citizen. He was someone that the Biden administration and the German government very much wanted to free. His health was terrible. We worried that when, we knew some of the people on jail there, we were worried that he wouldn't make it, he wouldn't live. On the day of the trade, the White House is worried, is this guy coming out alive? And it's that, if in this perverse way, when you're the hostage taker, that works for you. It works.
It's another point of leverage for Putin. Right. Talk to me about Alexei Navalny. That seems to me tragic, poignant, and this close to freedom's story.
We knew at the Wall Street Journal, as journalists for the Wall Street Journal, we knew about that there was a trade coming, and it would have brought out Alexei Navalny, Russia's most famous dissident. And more personally for us, it would have brought out our own reporter, our colleague, our friend, Evan Gershkovich. And we knew this was happening, and we had even prepared the stories. Navalny freed, Evan Gershkovich freed. They were ready to go. And we thought it was days, maybe a few weeks away. And
as we say in the trade, all the B matter was written.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I was a print reporter back when I was respectable.
HFR, hold for release.
Hold for release, right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And probably if we were more superstitious, we wouldn't have tempted fate. And then we found out, and it wasn't just us. Kamala Harris was flying to Germany to meet the German government to work out this deal. Chris Wray, the FBI director, was at Munich also to meet his counterparts and talk about this. Tony Blinken was having conversations with foreign ministers about it. And I'm saying on that morning. And then the news broke, and I don't know if your viewers remember this, Navalny's wife came out on stage, and she, holding back tears, said the time has come to hold Putin to justice. And then she went backstage and she met Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and she told him they don't want a prisoner change. She doesn't want to see a prisoner trade for this murderer in a German prison. And at that point, we thought it was going to take years. We thought all hope was lost.
It's an incredibly dramatic moment. Feels like a bit of a almost like a kind of crescendo in the book, because this meeting is happening. All of these, kind of most important people to the deal, some of the world's most important diplomats, all the security officials have convened on Munich, which is where the West's most important security conference is every year, to kind of put the final touches on this deal. And Munich, of course, was the place that Putin chose for, in many ways, one of his most famous speeches, where he first made it clear that actually Russia was going to confront the West. And it was on the morning of the beginning of the Munich conference, as a bunch of the chiefs of different Western intelligence agencies were actually sitting down for a meal, that they got the news that Alexei Navalny had died. And the idea that that wasn't a message, that that wasn't deliberate, is, even though we will probably never know exactly what happened to Alexei Navalny, it sort of stretches credulity that that wasn't somehow designed to send a message at that time.
I don't want to be dramatic about it, but it feels like a diplomatic turn of the knife.
That's right.
In everyone's gut right there.
It's another example of how hard it is to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. This is someone who's been in power 25 years. He has levers he can pull that we don't even know about and can't anticipate. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to put this book out and write this book, is because this is obviously extremely topical when we think about this.
Speaking of, let's pull that thread, because as average Americans look at what's going on and see the summit in Alaska, then the meetings with the Europeans and the phone call to Putin, what kind of things did you come across that they keep in mind when they're evaluating what to make of what Putin says and then what he actually does?
This is in some ways, this book is the story of what happens underneath the surface of these summits. What we see is a very thin veneer of handshakes and protocol and choreography between leaders or diplomats, and under the surface are all these other machinations, are all these other characters trying to basically do deals. And because Putin has made this practice, so important to Russia and such a kind of such a tool of leverage, you better believe that pretty much at every one of these summits, either at the leadership level or at the secondary level, other prisoner swaps are being discussed. Ukraine and Russia, obviously, they are once brotherly nations who've become mortal enemies. There is virtually no realm in which they communicate apart from prisoner swaps. Their military intelligence agencies have a channel, and thousands of people, more than at any time during the Second World War, have now crossed over this border. The Russians have said on the record, if you're paying attention to this, which is, it feels very granular, but it's actually very important, that they want to do another prisoner swap with the US. They want to swap 9 prisoners for 9. If they did a 9 for 9, that would be the biggest bilateral prisoner swap between Washington and Moscow ever, including the Cold War. So this is not just something which is, some sort of ephemera beneath the surface. It's very, very central. And we didn't know this coming in, and we didn't choose this story. The story kind of chose us. But it's a fascinating way to understand what's happening in the world and the way that power flows.
And Drew, I don't want to bury the lead, but a big part of the beginning of the book is about the big swap.
Right.
Multinational.
Right.
Moving parts all over the globe, interlocking for a moment, where if anything had gone astray, just one thing falls out.
For sure.
So many things could have come. The diplomats and the intelligence officers who worked on that trade last August that freed 24 people and 2 children, they had a code name for it, the Rubik's Cube. Because if you've got one square out of place, the whole thing's busted. They had to get 24 different prisoners in Norway, Slovenia, Germany, America, Russia, all move through this complex legal timetable. You had people in the intelligence community here looking up Norwegian case law. You needed to do incredible work to get all these governments to put prisoners on planes to all land on one tarmac on August 1st in Turkey at the same time. Any number of things could have gone wrong. Someone could have gotten food poisoning. Someone got sick. Word could have broken loose. The Russians could have backed out as they threatened to. And somehow it came together. And it is the biggest, most complicated prisoner swap. Nothing, even in the Cold War, touched it.
And Joe, when we first started this conversation, we were talking about the moral gray areas and the conundrums and the ethical bitter pills you have to swallow. That's one nation to one nation. Every other nation you add layers that on top. Plus you're dealing with, as you said, underlying case law. What is legally permissible? What are you stretching? What are you elasticizing to almost its breaking point to rationalize something like that? All of that was involved.
Absolutely. And that's why as a as a reporter, this story is such a gift, actually, because there are so many different threads, so many different strands that needed to be coordinated. And look, what the Americans who were leading this needed to do was to convince the Germans, to convince the Poles, to convince the Slovenians to harmonize their legal and judicial timetables, which is, on the one hand, nobody wants to get involved and influence another country's rule of law. But in order to do this, those were the deals that needed to be done. And in a way, it's we hear so much about the decline of the multilateralism and the rules-based order, and this was a real victory of alliances. And it's maybe, especially with the strained alliances we see right now, hard to see that maybe they'll be able to do it again. But there is a kind of note of hope there that they pulled this off, and the Biden administration deserves big credit for that, for sure.
And Drew, one thing I want to also take a moment to evaluate. In Evan Gershkovich's case, you had a large corporation that ran a media organ, the Wall Street Journal and Fox News and others. The US government knows that. The Russian government knows that. And at times, as I came across it in the book, again, 14 pages, I didn't read the whole thing, but I got this interpretation. There were times the Biden administration wasn't sure what it was dealing with. If there were those involved leaking to the Wall Street Journal, and if the Wall Street Journal on the editorial page was bashing it, what would that mean?
Right.
That's another factor here.
This is also a story about press freedom in America.
Okay.
And the links that America has to go to free a journalist. Not just one, 3 journalists came out last year. And the links that a White House and that a country did to return journalists. Naturally, like you said, there are complications in that. Can we talk to a media organization like the Wall Street Journal? Or are they going to write stories about it? I was there when Evan Gershkovich, Alsu Kermasheva, another journalist for Radio Free Europe, and Vladimir Kara-Murza for the Washington Post went free. I was here in D.C. And what I found really moving is that day, the Russians, on the Russian side, came out, a murderer, spies, hackers, money launderers. And on our side, it was a former Marine, Paul Whelan, and journalists. And I couldn't help but feel moved, and maybe that's why we wrote this book, is it does say something about, for all the problems that we talk about in the news, there's something noble in that this is what America did for ordinary reporters and citizens.
There's no better way to end our conversation. Joe Parkinson, Drew Hinshaw, I told you folks I read 14 pages. I'm going to read all the rest. It's that good. It's been a pleasure. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.